Hello, welcome back. It's Matt here from Christopher Shaw, and I'm, of course, here with James Tiller. And today we welcome a new face on the YouTube channel, which is Olivia Peterson from Frettons, who is a dispute resolution solicitor. And we've had need for a dispute resolution solicitor recently. So welcome to the show, Olivia. Very nice to meet you and see you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
You're welcome. I know you're nervous, so we'll take it easy on you today. But I'm sure you are a seasoned professional. So we're going to get into points with disputes, a dispute resolution, and probably cover some of the most common problems that you come across, because obviously you are at the very sharp end of the stick with your landlords who have potentially come a cropper, either to making mistakes or to just a nightmare tenant situation. So we'll start off with the basics. So what are the rules with the deposit registration, and who is responsible for this, i.e. the agent or landlord?
Yeah, okay. So essentially all deposits that are taken by landlords, obviously they don't have to take a deposit if they choose not to. Obviously it is advised that they do just for their own protection. But if they do choose to take one, they must protect it in some kind of scheme. The landlord can choose which scheme to use. Obviously there are agents that can guide them as to the different schemes out there. But ultimately the liability will land with the landlord if it isn't protected. The deposits are generally taken for the security of obviously the performance of any obligation by the tenant, and if there's any liability that arises under that tenancy, if your deposit has been protected, then you have a recourse there. Generally it's limited to 5 weeks rent. I believe I know that there are 6 weeks rent where the annual rent is £50,000 or more, but generally it is just 5 weeks rent that is protected.
Yeah, very rare for us to have more than 5
in this area.
Yeah.
But it is something which is those are the rules that came in as part of the tenant fee ban in 2019. So with schemes, what there's sort of different types of protecting deposits, isn't there? There's the custodial scheme where an agency or a landlord can hold it and they send it across to one of the government schemes. So there's like the TDS, the DPS, my deposits, or there's like an insurance scheme where it can be held in a client account, or if you're managing it yourself, you may not have a client account. What would a landlord do in that situation if they were insuring property?
So obviously, yeah, aside from the 3 main, like you say, the custodial ones, you do have the new private schemes that have been rolled out quite recently, actually. I think they're being marketed as a no deposit option for tenants. And I think they're becoming so much more popular because it is such a good way for the tenant to, much better for the tenant rather than the landlord, in the sense that the tenant doesn't have to come up with those 5 weeks rent. But like you say, it is more of an insurance-based scheme. Those ones actually generally tend to cover 6 weeks rent instead of the standard 5. And essentially what happens is the tenant pays an initial non-refundable fee, which is usually the equivalent to 1 week's rent, plus a setup fee, followed by kind of an annual fee with this third-party agency. Or I think some of them do it where you pay a monthly premium instead. And essentially it is just held by that third-party company. There's not the 5 weeks rent. It is more of an insurance payment monthly basis, and at the end of the tenancy, the landlord and tenant will obviously try and reach a resolution between them as to what needs to be paid back, whether there is anything that needs to be taken from the tenant, and then it will be the company that will pay that to the landlord, what they feel should be awarded, and then the company can seek to recover that directly from the tenant instead. So it kind of removes the landlord out of it, in that it will be that private company that if there is, that kind of dispute and the landlord and the tenant aren't able to reach an agreement, the company will pay it to the landlord, and then it's the company that will take it up with the tenant from there. So I guess it does offer the landlord that kind of protection of, I've got my money back that I wanted. And then it will be, like I say, the private company to then go and pursue that from the tenant.
So in a normal situation, tenant moves out, landlord's done a checkout report, they've got a number of costs they want to deduct. Tenant agrees to some of it, doesn't agree to other bits. What happens then?
Well, then that will go to if it is the custodial one, their ADR, so their alternative dispute resolution. That all of them have their own in-house dispute service to deal with the disputes such as this. The landlord and tenant will both provide their own evidence as to what they believe is due and why. And it will essentially just be down to that company to decide what they think is due and owing. And that's what then will be the case. If the landlord still doesn't agree with that, there are obviously other steps that the landlord can take. But that's kind of how it's dealt with in the in-house process.
Okay. So this doesn't happen too often, thankfully, but we have had a couple recently where either due to damage or malicious damage or just the amount of damage, it's exceeded the tenancy deposit. And that's probably, again, when it might land on a desk like your own, because the agent at that point obviously has run out of, effectively funds from the deposit. How would a resulting small claim work for kind of excessive damage in a property?
So obviously that would just run as a standard breach of contract case. So you've obviously got the tenancy agreement as its own binding contract between the landlord and tenant. Any breaches that have been settled already, fine. But if it exceeds that, then that would be a small claim, like you say. Generally, for cases such as this, the court requires what's called a letter of claim or a letter before action to be sent to a defendant, so the tenant, in proceedings like that. So just setting out the nature of the dispute, where the funds arise from, where the contract arises from, and obviously what's in dispute, what they're seeking. If you still don't get anywhere with that, then there are so many easy ways to issue a claim online yourself. I mean, generally for the cases that are lower than £10,000, we generally tend to advise that we don't get involved at that stage, just because it's very likely that you will end up paying more in solicitor's fees than the actual amount of the debt itself. And it's non-recoverable, so you can't recover your solicitor's fees if you issue a money claim for less than £10,000. It's just not provided for in the civil procedure. So we do tend to advise clients that they are to issue a money claim online themselves. It's quite a straightforward process. I mean, you just fill out the claim form online yourself. And like I say, everything you put in your letter before action or letter of claim previously, setting out the dispute, will just go into the claim form, and the claim serves it on the tenant. The court, serves it on the tenant. They have an opportunity to respond with their defense. And it will just run that way. It's not by any means process. I mean, generally, it will go to kind of the centralised court that deals with these money claims in Salford, County Court Money Claims Centre, and their turnaround times at the moment for dealing with correspondence is generally between 4 to 6 working weeks. So you imagine once you've served your claim form, they'll serve it on the tenant. If the tenant then files a defence, you could be waiting 5 to 6 weeks to get that from the court. It's not by any means quick, and we're seeing it across the board. The delays are just astronomical at the minute. Hopefully it's getting a little bit better as things are easing up post-COVID, but it will not be a quick process. And obviously from the very start till actually getting it in front of a judge for a hearing of some kind, you could be looking at up to a year. So it's not quick, but it is definitely easier than I think a lot of people think it would be. It may just run on in the background for a little bit longer than people think.
On that, if the money claim is raised online, do you require a address to serve that to the tenant on, or is it done a different way based on it being online for?
You do need an address. Obviously, ideally, you will get a forwarding address to the tenant. One of the tricky things, especially when you've got a tenant in a property, the civil procedure rules provides that you can serve it on a last known address of the tenant. But if you know that the tenant's not at your property anymore, that's not going to slide with the court. So you will need to get a forwarding address, or we use third-party agencies to actually do a trace. They tend to say leave it about 3 to 6 months after the tenant has vacated for them to kind of set up elsewhere, and they can perform a trace on them, get you an up-to-date address, and then that's what you will need to put as the tenant's address on the court paper. It's so important to make sure that, you've got the right address for service, because it could be raised as a defence and the whole thing could just fall apart quite quickly.
That's really interesting, particularly, I guess they would search on credit files for utilities.
They do, yeah.
And things as names and Yeah, that's really interesting and something which I know I certainly wasn't aware of, and I think that's going to be really useful information.
Yeah. Time is not a friend to landlords. Obviously, everything does take long. The eviction process takes long, so it comes back to obviously trying to get things right in the beginning. In particular, where landlords default a claim due to poor paperwork. So I'll nudge a question a couple up so it leads on from that, which is in your experience, what is the most common mistake that landlords make that lead them to having to speak to someone like yourself?
Absolutely, definitely service. And that is not just service of court paperwork. That is being able to provide proof that at the outset of the tenancy, you have provided your tenant with all of the prescribed information. So that's your gas safeties, EPCs, your how to rent guides, all of that kind of stuff. You can say you've done it, but if you don't have proof, you'll be hard pushed to prove a court that you've done it. So that's keeping the covering letter if you sent it in the post. Keep it. Generally, what we do is within our tenancy agreements, we actually have a page on the back which says, "I confirm that I've received these documents," and it is the EPC, the gas safety certificate, the how to rent guide, and we get the tenants to sign it just to show that they've done it. Because if you can't prove that you've served that on the tenant, you'll struggle to prove to the court that you've done that, and it's just so crucial to be able to show that they've received these documents. Ultimately, especially for the Section 21 procedure, you need to be able to show that you've done it.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably put a fairly hefty bet that most maybe non-agent using landlords probably feel that they do the right thing in the beginning of the tenancy and they provide the right paperwork. But like you said, it is recording it and being able to recall that proof. If it's just I signed a bit of paper, we know that most people that's going to get lost or filed and can't find it. We moved to paperless kind of serving of documents many, many, many years ago, so we can recall a signed, date stamped, e-signed service of documents in seconds. But it still amazes me. We had a sale complete without going too far off topic. We had a sale complete this week. In 2023, a landlord had no idea about deposits and so they just wanted to put it in their bank account. And the mind baffles because it's not new regulations.
Just on that, would you just run us through the deposit protection procedure and what landlords need to do and who is responsible for that?
Yeah. So within 30 days of receiving the deposit, the landlord must comply with the initial requirements of their chosen scheme. And they have to provide the tenant and any relevant person, and by relevant person, I mean, if parents are paying the deposit, you also have to give them the prescribed information about the scheme, about the deposit, and about the tenancy agreement. So that all needs to be given to them within 30 days of receipt of the deposit. If it's not, then you've not been compliant. And obviously, once those 30 days have passed, you've gone past that compliance period and there's no going back for that particular, obviously, that deposit.
And that might lead to, in the case, like you said earlier, about having to return the deposit if a claim came up.
Exactly. So if that's not been done and we get a landlord coming to us, by the way, that is all the landlord's responsibility. No one else's. I forgot to answer that part of the question. If we get a landlord coming to us wanting to serve a Section 21 notice, they haven't protected it within 30 days, or they've not served the document within 30 days, they will not be able to serve a valid Section 21 notice. That Section 21 notice just will not be valid. So our advice in those instances, you will have to return the deposit to the tenant before you're able to serve a valid Section 21 notice. And it's just, it's a very short time period. 30 days can fly by, but it is quite an easy thing to get done. And obviously, even easier if you're able to get, your agents to provide it for you. Generally, just I guess for you guys, it's just second nature to just get it all out.
Yeah, what we do is it's done straight away. Just what are the penalties if for non-compliance on that? Not only does it present difficulties with serving Section 21s and possession orders, there are penalties, aren't there?
There are. So the tenant can apply to the court for an order that the landlord repay the full deposit. And on top of that, the court can order a penalty. So the court, I believe, has to order a penalty. It's then down to them how much that penalty is. And it can be up to 3 times the amount of deposit. So say if the deposit's £1,500, they could be ordered to pay a penalty of £4,500, which isn't an insignificant amount of money. And it is all just because it wasn't protected within and the prescribed information given within the 30 days.
Matt just alluded to a sale this week where it's now going to be rented out. This one was vacant, but in the case that a property has a tenant in and it's sold landlord to landlord, say, the tenants already had their deposit protected. That would have been checked on the conveyancing and everything. Does the new landlord have to reserve documents to the tenant, or are they able to rely on those original ones?
They would have to reserve. So generally the seller would agree to pass the deposit to the buyer. And sometimes I think the schemes will actually do this for you. If you just give them the details, they will transfer it over into the new landlord's name. But the deposit is technically then re-registered, and that new landlord would have to prescribe all of that information again to the tenant within the same time frames as previously.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah, I think that we've covered quite a lot of ground on deposits and disputes and things. Is there anything more that you would like to add on any of those things? Any advice that you could pass on to landlords at all?
My advice for a private landlord would be get help from the outset. I think if you get advice from an agent, to anyone, just to know what to do from the outset, you'll have protected yourself later on down the line. It doesn't seem a lot at the outset, and it may seem like you're doing all these things, it's never going to matter. Trust me, it does, especially when you want your property back and you're told you can't have your property back because you've not done certain things, to comply with the legislation. I think definitely not so much outsource the work, but get advice definitely at the outset before renting.
Brilliant.
The country of technicalities and laws, aren't we? There is so much.
I know.
So easy to make mistakes, but I think when you deal with it day in, day out, we turn over many tenancies a month. So for us, it is like a habit now. And I think if you're a landlord that's had a tenant for 4 or 5 years and your only property that you let out, is very easy to get bypassed on a lot of these, new regulations, and your contracts that you've used for, 8 years, probably are very, very out of date. So, there is no harm in having a refresher course. And that's the purpose of these videos. So, thank you for joining us, Olivia. If you are a landlord that is watching this on the YouTube channel, hopefully you got something from it. This is free information that we give out kindly with friends who accompany us so many times on these videos and have been really good for us and with us. So thank you very much, Olivia. And I hope you weren't too nervous after.
No, it was fine. It was great.
So when you see you holding the water in a minute, it's shaking. But no, thank you so much for coming. Hopefully we'll do a few more of these together. Obviously, now you are our face for dispute resolution. And if anyone has a question, obviously they can contact you. Which office are you in? Which branch?
Ringwood, but I do also work from Christchurch, so either works for me.
Perfect. Okay, cool. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both.
Cheers.
Thanks, Olivia. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
So just a quick follow-up to that video. Thank you if you stayed and watched to the end. But we wanted to clarify 1 or 2 key points from that video, especially some of the bits that were right at the beginning, and to do with really the 2 types of deposits that we would most commonly use, or you might most commonly use as a landlord, which is a custodial scheme or an insured scheme. And by insured, we don't mean a deposit replacement scheme or an insurance scheme. We actually talk about insuring the deposit, which stays in your own account. So, James, do you want to cover?
Yeah, so there are 3 of the main deposit protection, government registered deposit protection companies. There are the DPS, the TDS, and My Deposits. All of them offer a custodial service, which in most cases is free. Mm-hmm. You basically pay the money into the deposit scheme, and they hold it in their separate scheme. No cost to the landlord, and you get all of the ADR dispute services at the end of it for free as well. There's also the insurance-based version of each of those schemes as well, where a landlord or agent can protect a deposit and hold it in a separate account, and it is insured, i.e. the deposit is insured, not the damages, if you like. So the deposit, so if you lost it or you went bankrupt or an agency disappeared, the deposit is insured and will not, and that meaning that the tenant will not lose it. It's part of, in agency terms, client money accounting or client money protection, but also it's just another thing that will protect a landlord if something happened to that deposit. that money is insured so the tenant will not lose their deposit if something ever happened to it. And that's really the main difference between the custodial and the insured schemes. The insured schemes just mean that the agent or the landlord can hold on to the money themselves.
I mean, what would you see as the benefit? Because me personally, I would say I'd rather not have responsibility of having the money in my account. I'd rather it was completely separate and out. But what would you say is the benefit? Why would a landlord choose an insured scheme?
The insured scheme tends to be a bit quicker in terms of how you can process it, because if you can get your agreement with the tenant, all you need to do is then you
get the bank details.
You get the bank details, you pay them their bit, you keep your bit. If you're in the custodial scheme, you have to rely on the tenant accepting the claim and then it going through another party to pay out. So that's, I suppose, the biggest benefit is that you hold on to the money. And yeah, it just makes the repayment at the end a little bit easier.
Okay, fine. So if you're not sure, I would still say probably custodial was the way to go. But it's personal preference.
Whatever, you just got to make sure, as Olivia said, you've got to
do it right.
It within 30 days. Make sure you serve out your documents, the prescribed information, and making sure that you're not breaking that that considerable piece.
And find a way to record that you've served it, and keep that for however long the tenancy goes for. So thank you again for tuning in. Just wanted to clear up those couple of points. Hopefully that helped. But if you are lingering with extra questions, then of course, give us a call on 01202 554470. Matt or James here to help. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.